Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today I have Josh Purvis on the show. Good morning, good afternoon to you, Josh.
Good morning to you as well, and afternoon to you, right?
It is. We're I think about 8 hours behind, or you're 8 hours behind us. Yes.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Josh. So you're the co-founder and chief product officer at Assembly,
hmm
and Assembly is a peer-to-peer employee recognition and engagement platform where co-workers can recognize each other with meaningful messages and rewards. And I had your other co-founder, Jonathan Fields, on about a year ago on the show. So it's good to have you on as well. And today we're going to be exploring curiosity and listening and how to solve problems, how to create healthy debates, arguments, I guess, conflict potentially in a healthy way that creates ideas and opportunities. And I'm sure you've been full of that in your business growth over the number of years you've been working at Assembly. But before we get into that, Josh, I'd first like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
Yeah, that's a really loaded question. As a product manager, you do so many things. You wear so many hats. It's really tough to, I think, distill it down to one specific thing. But if I were forced to, I would say just being obsessed about the problem that you're trying to solve for your customers and the value that you can create by being obsessed by that problem. And not only that, like you get to work with a team of people. This isn't an isolation role. This is a role where typically as a PM, you're talking to literally every single department or person inside of an organization that is, within some degree of relationship with you. So your first, second, third degree relationships, you're really talking to a lot of people. So you maximize, collaboration in a very unique way being a PM. And I think that's probably what I love most about the role.
Brilliant. So it sounds like you got very passionate about problems. You love problems. You like problems with that your clients and your customers give you. Um, well, firstly, how at Assembly do you solve those problems? I mean, do you have a process or you just go to task on them? I'd be interested to understand how you go about it, and perhaps give me an example of might be a recent problem if you can share it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably what we're evolving into as a business. I find that problems are very deceiving, and that people tend to hide their real problems, and you can dig most of the problem out by talking to the person, but sometimes you need to observe the behavior. I think there's this common idiom or ideology around what people say and what they do is very different. And those two things are hard to reason whenever you're trying to come up with like what you're actually trying to solve. So you have to listen and talk to them, but you also need to observe their behaviors organically when they're not talking to you, because oftentimes those two things are just different enough to where you can start to close the gap in what they're saying and what they're doing. And so I think a lot of that is what we're trying to solve with Assembly. And you mentioned at the top of the show, we're an employee recognition tool. We're so much more than that today. Since the last time you talked to Jonathan, we've built an incredible amount of product, but in a very clever way. So Jonathan leads our sales, and he kept getting questions about, what more could we do for our customers? Our tool was the most engaging tool that they had. It was one of the better successes that HR had rolled out in their organizations, customer by customer. So we kept getting asked things like, can you run surveys? Can you do more constructive feedback instead of just the good stuff, the recognition pieces? Can you build forms? Can we do manager one-on-ones with your tool? We kept getting asked more and more stuff. And it's really hard as a PM to get conviction on any one of these things, because the second you build something, you lose effectively the optionality to build something else. And you have to keep focusing on making that tool that you just built better and better for your customer. So I held optionality for a really long time, trying to understand like which piece of these things we should build next. And it really is just a synthesis of making sure you're consistently listening to your customers. And Jonathan's at the forefront of that, so it makes it really helpful and easy. And then we have our data, and we can observe what people are actually doing. So we started running small tests here and there, and we got conviction on this concept of building a no-code tool rather than trying to build one extra vertical of our tool. So rather than going and saying, okay, we're getting a lot of feedback requests. Let's build feedback. We built flexibility into our tool so that we can actually observe what our customers are wanting from us more than anything. And what's really interesting about that is as we've built this no-code tool, which allows a customer to come in and take a block, which is just an input of some sort, like an open-ended question or a scale block or a drop-down or whatever it is, and they can stack these things into a form to accomplish really any of their needs. We've discovered that there are hundreds of use cases that people care about, not just one, not just 10, not just 20 or so. It's much more than that. So now we have one-on-ones being our top use case. We have everything from a daily agenda to team retrospectives running. Lots of people do contests like Halloween contests, which are really fun, and keep the organizations engaged. All the way to one random person doing a Korean word a day, just trying to basically learn a Korean word a day, and that's one of our longest standing running flows at the moment. So pretty incredible what you can learn by giving people the tools to just kind of create things.
So it seems like you've created a model that allows not to be fixed in your problem solving and allows a little bit more of a flow, but also for the client and the customer to actually solve it themselves. And it seems that rather than just being fixed and hearing your customers, but also, as you said at the start, when people share something, what their real problem is something else. Until they engage in something, they probably don't realize what their real problem is. You know what I mean?
Yep.
How are you finding that when you're perhaps interacting with people in your team, for example? How do you decipher and get to the point, or the sort of central point of what the problem really is when somebody's sharing with you a challenge or a problem with something? How do you personally get to that point where you go, this is what the real problem is?
Yeah, I mean, I try my best with my team in particular, and I think with the organization. And I think Jonathan and I practice this publicly just enough to where I think it encourages it in the sort of atomic units as well, like my actual team itself, to where there's comfort in expressing counter opinions that maybe the employee may feel vulnerable to talk about because as a leader of the business and a co-founder of the business, I have this like weird, I guess, power in the organization. And it's really hard, I think, for organizations to develop a culture where the employees are comfortable creating that conflict with a co-founder or someone in leadership roles. And I've done a really good job, I think, maybe a pat on my back for myself, but like my team feels very, very confident in countering me constantly. So, I think it's really important to support the vulnerability, to support people going out on a limb. And for me, it's primarily around just like having those hard conversations and getting to the real answer and making sure that no one idea is overweighting any other idea just because of the person saying it.
Yeah, and you made I think a valid point where people have got to feel comfortable either to share new ideas or to perhaps challenge your thinking on something. And you've created that. What do you think you've done to try and create that sort of culture where, well, people call it psychological safety, don't they? Where people feel safe, they can challenge and they can try new things, and it's okay if they fail and and all that sort of stuff, new ideas. So what do you think you've done? Has that been an intentional thing, or is that just the way you've worked or what you've observed in organizations you've worked in previously?
Yeah. I mean, I think I forget who said this, but it's show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. I think we've done a really good job incentivizing people to not focus on just the wins only. And I think, experimentation at Assembly is critical to why we've gotten to where we've gotten so far. And we're going to continue to promote experimentation. And I think by promoting experimentation, you have to be comfortable with failure. You need more at-bats with your customer because you're going to be wrong more than you're right. And if you are diminishing people's ability to experiment because you're punishing them or making them feel bad about their losses, you're not going to have a culture of experimentation. You're not going to have a culture of curiosity. You're going to lose innovation and you're going to lead with fear. And I think that's how you ultimately lose. So a lot of the way we do this internally, and I think we've created a culture around this internally, is like just rewarding people, and even talking about it in our general channel. Like, John and I will literally promote somebody in a channel for just failing at something. And I think it's really important to bring that to the attention, right? It's like,
so that's calling out all the losers, is it, in the organization?
Calling out losers, but doing it in a way that it's like we're proud of the effort and proud of like what they actually did to actually get to that point. Not necessarily calling them out because they've lost at something, but calling them out in a way that's like, hey, I really respect the effort that went into figuring this answer out, despite the outcome being not a positive outcome, perhaps, for the business.
Okay, so you're almost sort of publicly role modeling that actually it's okay to try things. We're rewarding your effort, we're rewarding you going for it, and actually it doesn't matter if you didn't make it, because actually innovation doesn't happen until you failed a number of times, isn't it, really?
Yeah, correct. I mean, it took us a long time to get to where we are, and like I said, I mean, we don't build a lot as soon as we possibly can. We get a lot of feedback, we get a lot of customer demand from like certain things, and we really hold optionality for a pretty long time. When we do build things, we sprint at it as fast as we possibly can, but that's because we've developed some sort of conviction around it over some period of time.
Okay, and so you've obviously created this culture of experimentation and really sort of pushing the boundaries. How do you know that you are really truly in that place? What else are you observing in terms of your organization, your people, and the state of play, how you're grown as a business?
Yeah, I mean, we've hired some pretty early on. We've hired some pretty junior people, mostly by necessity, because we couldn't get the most senior people to join us as we were a tiny little startup. And those people have grown so far beyond some of the best people I've worked with, in other companies. So I think the reason why I'm pretty confident that we are in a state of curiosity, in a state of experimentation, is the people in our business that we've hired have grown exponentially. I've worked with some really great people at companies like Honey and PayPal and ZipRecruiter and other companies, phenomenal people. And I can't tell you enough, like some of the people that were junior in our team are now, beyond senior. They got a master class in building a company, and they're like critical to the business. They're just absolutely critical to the business. I couldn't imagine losing them.
Fantastic. That's great. It's great when people come on that journey with you right at the start, isn't it? And and almost grow and actually help contribute to the success of the business. It's always trying to keeping hold of those people and keeping them interested and stirred and motivated and everything else. So you've built this sort of experimentation type culture, this sort of psychological safe. People feel they can go for it. When you go to think about ideas and your ideation sort of process, and how do you go about that? I mean, is that done in a separate session, or is it on the fly? Is it through Slack channels? How do you create this sort of ongoing ideas that, from the feedback you're getting from your clients and your customers, and how we sort of meet their needs and solve their problems? How does that happen? Because sometimes a danger of a company that is into experimentation, and certainly when you have a startup and you're not a startup anymore as such, is there's a plethora of ideas and there's just far too much, and you just can't. There's too many shiny things going on. I don't know. That probably feels quite comfortable with that. You like lots of shiny stuff, but actually, how do we sort of manage the ideas and then bring it to an execution? That's what we're going to run with.
Yeah. I mean, today it's a lot easier because now we're in I think a better place product wise to understand by observing our data, like what customers are doing and why they're doing it. I think we've set ourselves up to kind of be able to actually observe this, where when we were just doing recognition, it was much harder. Like, we did not know what to build next. It took a lot of time, a lot of conflict and arguments internally to really get to that point. But now that we've shipped this tool, we have 200 different templates that solve different use cases that a customer can come in and adopt. And we just observe. We're passive observers. It's more about discovering behaviors than it is about trying to necessarily create them. So it's more about going with the flow and just trying to see where people are pushing the boundaries of our own platform and our own tool to deliver value into their own organizations. And by having access to that type of data, it really allows us to not necessarily try to be the like master idea creators and get as many hits as possible, because we can kind of get pulled into those rather than trying to push them onto our customers. So we use a lot of observation, and then we also hear the pains of our customers on like where things are failing. So like if someone tries to push the boundary of our tool and the template doesn't necessarily solve their needs completely the way they expected it to, they're pretty vocal about it. So I think one thing that helps with that is we get feedback. So the observation piece and the feedback piece really play into how we build towards that.
So you're very much led by that feedback and observation, which is you're not there just in a silo creating ideas, and actually you're almost observing your clients and your customers interact with your platform, and actually start to think some behaviors here, we can tap into that and we can use that elsewhere, which is an interesting model, isn't it, in terms of and also having that ability to do that, isn't it, compared to other companies don't probably have that opportunity, because you've got this platform that you can observe behavior, which is probably more impactful in terms of what they're really doing, what they really need, is because you see it in a real life situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else in life, right? It's like you ask a question and you can find an answer, whereas I think like a lot of companies get stuck in this like, what do we do next? What do we do next? And then they have a team of PMs that are trying to brainstorm ideas out of sort of the ether and out of nowhere. And I've been a part of these. I was a part of these at other various companies where you're just trying to like understand what you should build next, but the customers aren't really telling you anything because they just like your core product. We have a benefit, we have templates, and they can take our tool in 200 plus different directions. And we really get to observe that behavior completely. So as people start to do different things, and as people sort of have tendencies towards certain templates, we know, one-on-ones are extremely popular inside of assembly. We should probably reinforce that and build tools to support that use case in particular to be better and better and better. So it's sort of obvious for us on what we should do next versus trying to make guesses and throw noodles at walls.
So you're not like going off site every quarter thinking about the next big thing. You're just observing almost on the go. That's like a constant stream of just watching what your clients are doing and see how we need to respond and act to that. How do you use it within your organization with the people you work with? How do you use conflict to create, or friction, I should say, to create ideas or to get the best out of something, to really make something that sort of stick in the context of ideas?
Yeah, I think there are lots of frameworks that help with conflict, and I think you always need a moderator to sort of help make sure that, or moderator facilitate these conversations that isn't going to enable these to get to like a place of personal attack, and they're more about attacking the problem. But I think a really good framework is one called the 5 Whys. There's a bunch of them, but I appreciate the 5 Whys quite a bit, which is, it's sort of poking fun at this like concept of just like, okay, I've asked a question, I've gotten an answer, and I think that's what we should do next. Well, then that's like not enough necessarily. Typically, whenever a customer tells you something, or internally you hear something from an employee, or you hear something in your life in particular, it's like the surface answer is not always necessarily the truth, and you might have to dig deeper. We hear things like this quite a bit inside of assembly. One of the things we're trying to understand is like, how do we reposition our go-to-market now that we're not just a recognition tool? Because we'll hear things like, we just had a conversation the other day in a meeting where we were talking about like, how do we ask our customers why they're really buying our tool? And it's hard because we advertise a lot on recognition, and I think one of the ideas and the ways we were having this conversation is like really pushing the sales team to be like, okay, how do I ask better questions? How do I formulate a question that's actually going to get to the root cause of this? And it's tough because, the person that might be on the other end of the call might not be the decision maker. They might be the person just shopping for a platform that the company's decided is the right thing to buy. But my push towards trying to figure out an answer is, okay, like they might come to you and they might say, we ran a survey and basically the result of that survey was we're terrible at recognition internally. And so that's why we're buying you today. Well, that answers that like they want a recognition tool, but it doesn't explain like why they think a recognition tool is going to be viable or useful for their business. It's not a business outcome. You don't buy a tool just for recognition's sake. So the next, question is like, well, what do you think that recognition is going to do for your business? What's the expected outcome that you're going to get by providing your team with a recognition platform? They might say something that's, again, somewhat surface level and kind of goes almost backwards, which is, well, we want our employees to be happier. It's like, well, that's obvious. Yeah, everyone wants their employees to be happier. But why do you want your employees to be happier? What's the expected outcome of a happy workforce? Well, it might be something like, well, our productivity is really low, so we want higher productivity because we believe that happier workforce is going to increase our productivity. It might be we have a retention problem and we're losing talent, we're bleeding talent, and so we want to retain our talent. It might be, we want a culture of curiosity, right? It's like, and we don't have anyone like actually communicating or collaborating with one another. And so we're trying to like foster that sense of collaboration with one another by building a connection and interdependency between people by providing a recognition tool. So you start to see where like our go-to-market as like purely a recognition tool is very bottom of funnel and only gets to the people that have decided that, oh, recognition is going to give me these outcomes. But what I'm really curious about for myself and for our business when we go to market in this like, new world is what are they looking for down at the bottom? Like what is where do they start? Where's this conversation starts? Like what is the real problem in their business they're trying to solve with recognition? Because business leaders, especially the people that are buying these tools or are approving the purchase of these tools, like CFOs, they have an expected outcome that they want. They don't just want to buy a recognition tool because HR ran a survey and they found that recognition was poor. They want real business results.
Yeah, and it's getting to that. The real problem is by asking that question, just digging to the point of what's the motive behind it, what's the real driver, and that's what you've got to try and satisfy ultimately. Your tool may do it ultimately at the end, but actually knowing that can help you in terms of what product offering and how you go about implementing that and everything else. So that's really important. That's hard, isn't it? That's almost, it feels sometimes when you in that conversation, you're drilling people to points of you keep pushing people all the way through until you get to the answer that you think you're there, and in terms of what the real issue is. That's really important, actually.
I mean, one quick thing on this, like what's sad is like curiosity has been compressed throughout our lives, and it's just an organic thing, and I think it starts with schooling and a bunch of other things. It's like Warren Berger, a book he wrote about basically the art of questioning. He ran a survey, or he had access to someone who ran a pretty large survey, and he found that 4-year-old girls on average, the average 4-year-old girl asks 390 questions a day, and as she progresses through school, that number radically declines because you're being incentivized to answer rather than to question. And so I think a lot of times, again, going back to vulnerability and all these other things, it's like if you have an incentive of receiving an answer, you're going to get an answer. You're not going to get a question. And we're trained over our lives to constantly just provide answers rather than question things and think about things. So like as kids, we're extremely curious beings. And as we get older, it's harder and harder to like have that vulnerability of curiosity.
We almost need to unlearn it, really, don't we? Because I think I agree with you. We've gone to that place where we have to then be able to say things to people and tell people things and inform them things. And being curious might be perceived, and it's not. It shouldn't be. Of you don't really know what you're doing because you're asking lots of questions. But actually, and I think this is probably starting to happen in certain sectors in education, is the critical thinking. And that critical thinking comes through by questioning and challenging norms, challenging, well, we've always done this way. Well, can we not do it a different way? And I think we need, I agree with you, that sort of perhaps not having 300 questions a day, but still up in our questions. And I know, having had sort of 4 daughters, yes, I do remember those questions of, well, it's just why, Dad, why, and it drills you all the way to a point where you've got to really know why you're not supposed to do this thing and why it's bad for you. Because I've said it as a top line, but actually why it really is bad for you, because you've asked me 4 or 5 times why. And I think I agree with you. I think we need to encourage that. And there is vulnerability, because there's a challenge comes with it. And obviously why can be quite an aggressive question. There's ways of saying what or how to make it less aggressive. But when you get curious, I think you get some real interest, and also for the person you're asking the what questions, the why questions, I think they learn as well a lot about it in that context. They understand a bit more about why they are asking that question themselves. That's important.
Yeah, I mean, we all get more defensive whenever our ideas or our thoughts are being questioned, and I think that's why you have to foster a culture of vulnerability to actually have curiosity in the culture, and the acceptance of somebody asking that question, why 5 times to get to a real answer in your business. Because otherwise, you're stuck with these surface level answers that may or may not result in any success.
What do you think the obstacles are in leadership for creating an environment of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be really, really, really comfortable with failure. It's so cliche. It sounds like so obvious, but I think it's the one that is probably the most important. Is you need more at bats with your customers, because if you are doing 10 projects a year, it's just not enough. You have to be really, really accurate in your ability to produce the correct thing every single time. And if that's all you have time for, well, you're going to be wrong more than 50% of the time. So if you want to be right, you need to reduce the scope of things, and you need to increase the speed at which you experiment. And most of those experiments are going to fail, but if you can increase that rate significantly and ship more to get quick answers that allow you to build upon that answer, versus trying to say, like, I have conviction, I'm going to go and build this behemoth of a tool that's going to take us 6 months or a year. And then it falls flat because you didn't do it right, or you didn't find where the behavioral patterns are. It's just going to be hard, and you're going to ultimately fail, and you're going to not necessarily look great as a leader. And then you're going to end up blaming your team for doing all the wrong things because you asked them to go build this behemoth tool. I'd much rather see my team take small, tiny bets and do 2 to 4 week long projects max that get to a behavioral answer as soon as possible. And that could be changing a button that says, is an icon to a share. As an example, it's like, I want to drive the pattern of will somebody share this thing instead of our tool, as an example. How do we influence that behavior as much as possible? And can we? I don't know that we can necessarily, but we need to answer that question.
And how transparent should we be on our journey from creating that innovation that actually works? I mean, we all know that we need to fail more and everything else, and we can all say it. You're doing it as a business, so you're doing it. But the challenge I put out there is I don't see a lot of transparency about the fade bit. All I see is that at the very end, we've got it and that's it. And we failed along the way, but there's no transparency. And how transparent should we be internally, but also externally?
Externally, harder to say. I think internally, it's pretty easy. I think it just goes back to the rewarding the right thing and incentivizing the right thing. So if you keep your incentives aligned with a culture of experimentation where people are constantly experimenting things, and you're only promoting or recognizing the wins, you're going to quickly turn that culture into not an experimentation culture. Everyone's going to index towards trying to find as many wins as possible, which means fewer risks, fewer chances, and everything else. So it's more about making sure that you are being radically transparent around the losses as well, and saying, we tried this thing, this is why it didn't work, and having a good explanation as to why those things didn't work, but also promoting them as well. So each loss you have, you need to promote just as equally as your wins. I think if you start incentivizing your wins too much, you lose that experimentation.
Yeah, and it's using that where you failed or where things didn't quite go right is using that as an opportunity to learn, isn't it? And that's the frame on it all. And so, how can we do this better next time? That's the idea.
Yep.
I agree with you. I think we need to be more curious. We need to be more challenging in getting to the real core of what the issue is, whether it's a one-to-one with somebody or with a client or customer. Thank you for your time today, Josh. If people want to connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way of doing it. Also, my email, if anyone wants to email me, is josh@joinassembly.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.